Thank you guys for joining me. I'm really excited about this topic of discussion because I feel like it's one of the most interesting, relevant, and provocative as we think about business in the 21st century. And Brigitta, let's start with you because you're at Hyatt and you're sort of at the forefront of this. I want to start with this sort of philosophical question almost, which is businesses clearly have a responsibility to their boards, to their shareholders, to their investors. But do they have a responsibility to society? And if they do we need sort of formalized accountability measures on that front?
Well, I think at Hyatt, our corporate sustainability platform is called Hyatt Thrive. And the reason why we chose that name is because we have 600 hotels in over 50 countries around the world. The health and the vitality of the communities that we're in is absolutely integral to our business.
Can you go back from there though? I mean, this is a fairly new endeavor if you look at the Hyatt's history. Can you ever come back from corporate responsibility?
Can you stop doing it?
Yeah.
Is that the question?
Yeah.
I don't think you can. I get asked the question a lot: is corporate responsibility a buzzword? I don't believe it is. I think, do people ask chief marketing officers of companies, is marketing a buzzword? I don't think so. I think people understand and believe that it's integral to the sustainability of a business, marketing is. And I think corporate responsibility is as well. And I think more and more it's being seen as a mainstream and critical component of doing business, especially in a world that's becoming increasingly resource constrained, in a world where there's increasing social unrest, where there's growing inequality. Being able to fill those gaps and address those issues isn't just something that's the right thing to do, it's also important to our business.
Let's talk about the sort of motivations behind that, Jessica. And I'll just put it bluntly. Is it altruism or is it guilt that pushes a company to do this?
It should be neither, I think. It should be in the interest of the business. So my job actually prior to Impact Engine, where we invest in for-profit startups that are making the world a better place, where business is aligned with social good, was at McDonald's, leading sustainable sourcing, which is, sort of could fall under the corporate social responsibility name, but in reality, think of sustainability as like a literal term, right? If you want your business to be around, in McDonald's case, for another 60 years, you need to make decisions for the future, not just for the next quarter, right? And so a lot of the things that happen, whether it be sustainable sourcing or more energy efficient buildings or treating employees well, et cetera, when you really think about it, it's about the sustainability of your business. So I don't think it was a guilt or altruism. It's about being good, sustainable business leaders.
That idea, Walker, of sustainability as kind of an existential proposition is kind of a long view on this, right? Like if you want to be McDonald's in 60 years, which is to say still producing food for a lot of people, you've got to make these changes. But it also comes down to sort of consumer interest in corporate sustainability. How much does it matter and who does it matter to if a company is engaged in corporate responsibility?
Well, so if you look at consumers, there are some people who are very enthusiastic and very engaged in issues related to the environment and sustainability, and for them, they'll pay for it at all cost. But that's a very small percentage of people. Everybody else is kind of looking for what's in it for them. And when you think about consumers, you have to understand that this is kind of a complicated issue in trying to understand where their headset is about these topics. We think about it in two ways at the Futures Company. First, when it comes to issues like sustainability, we look at people as citizens and we look at people as consumers. And when people make decisions as citizens, they're in a different kind of mindset and using different criteria than they are when they're making decisions about consumption. And what it comes down to for particular brands and particular categories is kind of the second thing that we look at, which are reasons to buy and reasons not to buy. So the process that people typically go through is they start with the reasons not to buy something, and you've got to kind of get past those criteria. But once you're in a set of brands that are okay to buy because they're okay morally, they're okay ethically, they measure up on sustainability, then I'm going to choose between those brands because they're all the same on sustainability. I'm going to choose between those brands on things that matter to me as a consumer. And so oftentimes we don't see sustainability high on the criteria that people use to pick a brand, because it's not a reason to buy, it's more typically a gating criteria or a reason not to buy that you have to get past.
I would assume that the small, you say it's a small number of people that really care about sustainability. I mean, the issues that we're talking about, when you talk about people as citizens, that becomes almost an inherently political proposition, right? How are you acting in the democracy? What are the values at the top of your list and the democracy, and how will you act on those?
Yeah.
I would assume the people most interested in this corporate responsibility, who are looking at goods or companies that practice it, are probably going to be young and probably further on the left side of the spectrum. Is that accurate?
Well, when we geographically profile them, they tend to be the stereotype. So they're on both coasts, and they're, much more politically liberal. And so that's definitely the case. Among younger people, there is a lot of speculation about whether or not they're more interested in these things to begin with. This is a generation that has grown up in an environment of purpose. And so this is naturally part of their mindset. It is the way that they have experienced the world as they've come of age. And so they more or less tend to take it for granted. But their process of evaluating whether or not they're willing to pay extra for something that's more sustainable is the same kind of consumer process. Sustainability works best when it reinforces the core benefit that a product is offering in the marketplace, as opposed to being something else that you're trying to sell people on.
So Brigitta, but when we talk about this and how relevant it is from a business standpoint, I mean, well, actually, let me backtrack a little bit. If we're talking about at the root of corporate responsibility is a set of values, right? And we talk, and the words that we've thrown around today are, environmental stewardship and sustainability. I mean, some of those, and I'm saying this against the backdrop of 2016, are partisan values at this point. And I guess from a business standpoint, how do you deal with people inside your company who may not share the values that are foundational to corporate responsibility?
Yeah. Well, we have a lot of stakeholders at Hyatt, right? We have colleagues, we have our owners, we have the people in the communities where we operate, we have our shareholders, and my finding is that it's important to all of them, but for very different reasons. Reputation is a huge driver of corporate responsibility, at least for Hyatt, meaning that our shareholders want to make sure that the company that they're investing in has responsible business practices in place, right? Because I can give you a great example. It was shareholders at Hyatt that first brought the issue of human rights and human trafficking to our attention, and the role that hospitality could potentially play in the issue, and the role and the responsibility that we as an industry have in really raising awareness around it. Right, it was something that hadn't crossed my radar when I started in this role at Hyatt. But it was shareholders that really demanded action, and that drove us to really consider the issue and then take some pretty specific and very targeted kind of actions to address it. Our colleagues, I will tell you that they interview us about our corporate responsibility practices. It is important for them to work for a purpose-driven company that has responsibility as one of its core areas of focus. And for our owners, there's a whole other set of dynamics, right? Anytime you use less energy, you use less water, you produce less waste, you also reduce costs, right? In addition to wanting to make sure that whatever brand it is that is on, the kind of the marquee at their hotel or their property, they want that to be a good brand, but they also want to make sure that we're running our business as efficiently as possible. And so I think everybody has a different reason for thinking it's important, but I would argue that very few people think it's not, irrespective of what their motivation is.
Yes, I've reused the towels in my bathroom multiple times, thinking like, I know this is good for the environment, but I also know they just don't want to wash my towels. But that's okay that those two interests dovetail. When we talk about sort of purpose-driven business, Jessica, and you work with a lot of younger companies, why are you seeing young people who arguably want to make the world a better, more sustainable place, a fairer place, a more equal place, why go into business and not, say, nonprofits?
Well, in their case, they're social entrepreneurs, right? So they identified a problem, they understand the problem, they have a solution that they think is going to fix the problem. And today, the automatic reaction is not to go start a nonprofit or take that to the government. You start with, well, what's the value proposition for this solution to this problem, right? And you ask yourself, well, then who would pay for that based on that value proposition? And you back into what type of corporate governance structure you should have, right? So it's no longer a values question of whether you should be a 501c3 or an LLC or a C Corp or a benefit corp or a B Corp, there's all these options now, but it's really a strategy question based on who are the types of people that will pay for your product. And it could be the end user, maybe that's a better choice for a for-profit, for instance, or it could be a philanthropist that wants to provide it for someone else, in which case maybe it's better for you to be a 501c3. So I think in the case of entrepreneurs, that's the motivating factor, is just thinking about how can I be most effective to bring this solution to this problem to the market and to scale it. And it's not always a nonprofit solution these days.
Walker, what are the pitfalls that companies make most frequently when getting into the world of corporate responsibility and trying to figure out a product for consumers?
Well, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. They try to sell sustainability as a reason to buy. So they say you should do business with us because we're a more sustainable business. And so we have practices that are reflected in our employee population, that are reflected in our operations, in our supply chain. And consumers are mindful of that and they appreciate that. But trying to figure out why that matters to me, or why, in most cases, I should pay extra for that, is a big leap for consumers. I think companies that have had more success are those that say our sustainable practices better deliver the core benefit that you're looking for. So it's a better skincare product because we've used natural ingredients. It's a better chocolate because we've sourced this from cocoa farms that use sustainable practices. And that's using sustainability as a way of selling kind of the benefit. Another framework that we use at the Futures Company is kind of think of the world and my world. And so the world sort of really matters to my world when you can breach that gap and show me why it matters in my world. And that, of course, makes consumers sound very selfish and small-minded. They're not. Nobody wants to live irresponsibly.
Right.
Everybody certainly tries to live in a proper way, but people are looking for products and services that can help facilitate that for them, and those products and services have to do the job that they're supposed to do. And sustainability, when it is sold to better deliver that benefit, is when it really succeeds.
I just wonder whether the product we're talking about isn't inherently, and I'm not going to call chocolate a luxury because I think some people use it for basic survival, including myself.
Bad example.
But do you know, you're talking about a consumer that is educated enough to sort of be concerned about ingredients and engaged enough with presumably the time to sort of focus on the procurement or the shopping in such a way that all these issues come to the fore when you're making the decision at the checkout line, right? So is this field, when you're talking about products, is it inherently narrow? I just worry that, can you do mass?
Yeah. Well, I think so. I think there are examples of products with scale that have been able to do this. I'm not suggesting that it's easy to scale any kind of benefit in a consumer category. Sustainability as a product element is no different than anything else in kind of the mix of things that you want consumers to pay attention to. But I will kind of add a little footnote to your thought, and that is we're headed to a world of technology where increasingly consumers are going to be using smart apps and algorithms to process all of the information of the world out there. And all you're going to do is specify a preference profile and then let the algorithm do all the work. That's how we're going to navigate the Internet of Things. And in that world, one of the things you may specify in your preference profile is sustainable product. And it'll go out and find the products and then make a recommendation to you. So I think we're actually headed to a world where these kinds of things could actually matter more in consumer decision making than we have seen in the past.
And I wouldn't disagree with that at all, Brigitta, but as the consumer has more information, And Walker mentioned supply chain issues. You know, the question is, where does corporate responsibility stop? At Hyatt, I am sure there are shampoos and towels and soaps that you guys are not producing, but that are being produced somewhere else in the world. And there are a host of questions that arise from the purchase in mass of those products. Labor, sustainability issues, the very same issues you're trying to combat sort of at the top level in the most direct way. How concerned are you guys about supply chain? And is there a point at which you say, okay, this is where Hyatt's corporate responsibility ends?
I would answer as somebody that is in part also responsible for I think maintaining the reputation of our company. I would say supply chain is of extreme interest to us, which is one of the reasons why we worry about some of the things that we worry about, human rights being one of them. We've made a huge commitment to sustainable seafood. And we started in 2014 by first of all banning shark fin in every single one of our hotels around the world. Big issue, huge revenue source for us, right? In Asia.
Shark fin.
Shark fin, huge revenue source. A big cultural item on our menus. You don't have a banquet in Asia unless you have shark fin soup there. But as a company that is purpose-driven, that has made a significant commitment to sustainability for many years, we also had to step back and say, we have a responsibility to do this. We cannot, as a public company that has made these commitments, condone this. And so we not only took shark fin off all of our menus, but we made a very public commitment to source at least 50% of our seafood from sustainable sources by 2018. Very difficult. Very, very difficult to do, because in many parts of the world, we just simply do not have, we do not control our supply chain, right? We're not a Darden, but we've made that commitment, and we're actually making huge strides toward it. And so are we gonna get there? I think so. Will we be in a much different place in 2018 than we were in 2014 because we've made these commitments? 100%.
Do you see yourself as being able to influence the market through these responsible practices in ways beyond just saying, we're not buying shark fin, but the way that you're producing this shampoo, we want you to change your practices in and around the production of that?
Absolutely. And I think what's interesting is, as an industry, we're actually starting to recognize that. And we're starting to understand that as an industry, we have a power to move markets. One of us independently, probably not so much, but as an industry we are. And I mean, I think the human rights example that I've cited in human trafficking, this hasn't been a Marriott initiative or a Hyatt initiative or a Starwood initiative. I think as an industry, we've recognized our responsibility. As an industry, we've kind of led the charge in saying we need to have a way to quantify and qualify carbon emissions. So together we came up with a way of doing that. So I think we see ourselves as having a role, but we also think that a lot of this isn't a competitive issue, and that as an industry we can really tackle some of these issues.
Jessica, of the issues that there are a panoply of issues to choose from when you talk about corporate responsibility, with social entrepreneurs, with young people, with the sort of forefront of business innovation, the place in which you live and work, what is most resonant? What issues are most resonant in that community? And where do you see the potential for the most growth?
So it depends if you're looking at sort of like specifically the for-profit tech startup space, where there's a much broader community of social entrepreneurs and young people who are going out trying to solve problems. The four areas that we focus on as a fund, and those are the four areas that we feel there's the most sort of tech startup opportunities in the for-profit space, where big need for society sort of coincides with big market opportunity at the same time, are education, health, economic empowerment, and resource efficiency. And we see a lot of new innovation, being able to leverage technology in new ways over the last several years and sort of moving into the future to change how healthcare is delivered, to change how affordable and accessible financial services are. Things like that sort of all fall into kind of where we see a big opportunity. If I were to take off like a sort of the tech hat, you might have different answers. If you take off the for-profit hat, you might have different answers. So the good news is, and this is actually actually why I feel hopeful about the world despite reading, depressing news every day, is that there are so many people out there coming up with solutions to problems, right? And I think I get to see that every day, all day, is left and right, dozens of people every day are sending us their ideas for funding, and I'm like, okay, there's hope because there's people out there doing something about it.
Sure, and it's almost where a door closes and a window opens. If one institution seems to be failing, there will be another that enters in its absence. We have time for one or two questions, and I think we have a microphone circulating, maybe right back there.
Hi, I'm John Ross. A lot of what you're talking about falls under what some people call the triple economic benefit: politics, people, planet. I'm wondering if you also would argue that some of the decisions that corporations make, whether it's around benefits, parental rights, parental leave for fathers, or even like we've seen in North Carolina with the leadership of big corporations against the bathroom law there, if you would tie that into the same concept of people, planets, profit, and overall branding. What do you think of that?
So that is an excellent tee up to a panel we're going to have in an hour, I think, Margaret, if I'm getting that correctly, about CEO activism. But that's a good question. And I'll start with you, Jessica. Is there a dovetail between CEOs directly getting involved in sort of the political process and shaping change? Does that dovetail with corporate responsibility?
So I can't comment on the political process specifically because I think that's a strategic question for each company, but I absolutely believe that every company has impacts, right? You can call it corporate responsibility, you cannot. You can have a CEO that just cares about a certain issue. It can be altruistic. However you look at it, every company that exists has impacts. I think what we're starting to realize in recent years is that that's happening. There's transparency about what those are that the world sees and sort of pressures people on. And there's an intentionality about it, right? And this is the same way as we are an impact investing fund. We work with investors that want to align their social returns with their financial returns. And all that is recognizing that our investments have always had impacts. Now we want to know what they are and align them with our values. It's the same as consumers are sometimes moving that way, and I think companies are moving that way. So I feel like the overlap's already there. It's just a question of do you want to direct which way it goes?
Yeah, Brigitta, do you agree with that the overlap is there?
I think there's overlap, absolutely. I think we consider kind of bigger issues that are out there in society. Always, we really are a purpose-driven company, right? Our purpose is to enable people to be their best every day. And if something really kind of veers from that purpose, we take a really hard look at it, and we do take a stand on issues that we think are important to us and that would veer us away from our purpose.
Walker, when it comes to the consumer, and we'll talk about this in greater detail, one imagines that the more active a business gets, either on the sort of notion of responsibility or actual sort of politics and policy, on some parts we know that it engenders sort of brand loyalty, but it also, the flip side is that it can further alienate consumers, right?
Yeah,
so how to think about this from a business perspective?
Well, companies have to walk this fine line. They don't want to get involved in partisan political politics. But I do think there is an awakening among companies over the last so many years of who their constituencies are. And it's not just stakeholders, and it's not just consumers, or shareholders, I should say, and not just consumers, but there is a broader number of constituencies that businesses need to measure up to that have an impact on the self-interest of those corporations. Because you can't ask corporations not to be self-interested, but you can open their eyes to all of the constituencies that they need to pay attention to. And I think when we see these kinds of broader issues dovetailing with things like sustainability, what we're seeing is a growing awareness by companies and CEOs of who their constituencies are, and to echo your language, what they need to do to kind of make the markets in which they operate. It's not just selling the products, but it's making the markets that create the opportunities for them.
Okay, we have time for one more. Right over here.
Sure. Rudy Anderson, I'm with the Chess Foundation. My question is, when you had mentioned social entrepreneurism, You said some of the biggest interests were health, education, and economic opportunity. Why would those differ than what you would see in the nonprofit space? Because those have always been the biggest drivers in change. So why would that be more for the for-profit? And why would people be driven into that area rather than the nonprofit space?
So I think it's just partly dependent on who that payer is again. So I think there's certain types of social issues where a social entrepreneur can have a really unique, innovative solution and want to get it out in the world. But let's say, for instance, serving the homeless or disaster relief. Those are things that are very unlikely to have a revenue model, right? A business, aside from philanthropy, right? That requires altruism, it requires supporting, and we need to do that. There are other things like, for instance, we have a company that we've invested in that provides an education technology platform for improving literacy. There actually is a market for education technology platforms. You can grow a business out of it, and actually it's a better way to scale that ability to improve literacy than trying to raise money kind of school by school by school. So it kind of just depends on how the market looks.
The implications, and we have like 30 seconds for this, but I want to get you two on record about this. What are the implications for a city like Chicago when you think about corporations getting this involved in change?
For us, it's really pretty simple. When the communities that we operate in thrive, our business thrives. We're dependent on thriving communities for employment, for investment on behalf of owners. People generally do not want to visit or do business in communities that are not thriving. So for us, it's a business issue as much as it's a philanthropic issue.
Walker?
Well, urban areas are the economic engines of the world and will be so increasingly as we look forward to the future. So for an area like Chicago, it's critical for companies to be engaged in these communities in ways that make them into the kind of markets where they can do as much business as possible. And so I think it is, as I said earlier, well within their self-interest to be very focused on making sure that they are creating a robust, sustainable environment in which business can thrive in this
You hear that, Chicago? That is all the time we have. Walker, Brigitta, Jessica, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.